This is the brand new Vermona DRM1 MkIV. Some weeks ago we wanted to order the predecessor Mark III, but they were out of stock everywhere. So we contacted Vermona to ask whether it was discontinued, and they said yes, but the Mark IV is coming. Do you want to make a review of the new version instead? So, ta-da! Full disclosure, this machine was sent to us by Vermona free of charge for the purposes of this review, without any terms or conditions. We just have to give it back when we're done. So, here's my unbiased and honest review. Hello everyone, this is... The DRM1 is not a drum machine, but a drum synthesizer. So for it to play any sequences, it needs to be triggered externally by another device. This can be done from a dedicated hardware sequencer, a computer, a MIDI controller, or any drum machine or groove box with a sequencer that also sends MIDI notes. Because the DRM1 has no sequencer of its own, this means that some of our usual review categories for drum machines simply don't apply here. That being said, let's get into it. The build quality is excellent. The knobs turn smoothly and everything feels top-notch. Using these screw holes, the DRM1 can be installed in a rack or casing. There are also some classic wood sides available if you prefer that. The front panel is slightly angled, which is very comfortable when operating it on a desk. It's quite big and it has a good weight to it. Here's an RD8 and a pocket operator for scale. There are 8 rows, 1 per instrument. Each one of these instruments has a trig button for manually triggering the sound. 7 sound shaping parameters that are specific to it, a pan and volume control, and an individual out. This also serves as an insert, but more on that later. The master volume. This controls the volume for the main outputs, as well as the headphones, which you can plug into here. The DRM1 now has a universal power supply that Vermona says will work anywhere in the world. Just plug the mains into here. Main left out and main right out. The DRM1 operates in stereo. Each voice can be panned left or right in the stereo field. Unless stated otherwise, you'll always hear the DRM1 straight from these outputs into an audio interface with no post-processing. If you only want to use the DRM1 in mono, you can of course pan every instrument to center and just use one of these outputs. MIDI in, MIDI out, and MIDI through. Another addition to the Mark IV is the USB B-type connector. Just for MIDI, not for audio. It's class compliant, so you can use it without installing a driver. This can also be used for future firmware updates. As with the past Mark III incarnation of the DRM1, there's the option to retrofit trigger inputs, which would go here. In the new version, these now accept dynamic trigger signals. In addition to that, all incoming analog trigger signals are converted into MIDI and then sent out via USB and MIDI out. Each instrument has its own individual mono output. If you plug something in there, it takes away the respective voice from the main stereo out. And here's a nice feature. The individual outputs are engineered as inserts. So, using a Y cable that goes from a stereo jack to 2 mono jacks, we can route the signal into an effect and bring it right back into the DRM1. No external mixer needed, and we can still pan the voice afterwards. There are 8 instrument voices generated by analog circuitry. Each one of these has full velocity sensitivity. The sounds aren't based on any other drum machine. It's an entirely original design, which has actually been around in different iterations for 25 years now. Because the DRM1 has so many sound shaping options, I'll show you a few different configurations. Let's start with some more traditional drum machine sounds, and we'll get more experimental from there. First, the kick channel. Drum 1 and Drum 2. These are two identical channels with slightly different frequency ranges. Multi. Snare. Hi-hat 1 and hi-hat 2. Hi-hat 1 and hi-hat 2 are another pair of identical channels. At first I thought, oh, only an open and closed hi-hat and no cymbal? But these are actually two independent instruments, and each one of them has their own closed sound with a short decay. Let's take hi-hat 1 for example, which currently responds to this MIDI note. If I play the note 2 semitones below, it will trigger the closed sound. These two form a choke group, so we can have a closed and open hat on hi-hat 1, and an open and muted cymbal on hi-hat 2 for example. And finally the clap channel. There are no presets or kits. This is a fully analog machine. What you see dialed in on these 72 knobs is exactly the sound you'll get. Egypt, Egypt by the Egyptian Lover, an 808 classic. I imitated the laser clicky sync trigger sound with the needle impulse that's available on the drum 1 and drum 2 channels. Rhodes 2 by Daniel Bell. "15 Step by Radiohead. We're going to need distortion for this one, so here's a neat trick you can use with any mono effect such as this pedal. The left main output goes straight into the audio interface with a clean sound, but the right main output goes through the pedal. With the pan pots you can now decide for each instrument how much of the effect you want to blend in, from 0 on the left to 100% on the right. Maniac by Michael Sembello. I routed the kick and snare from the individual outputs into my audio interface, and I'll add some gated reverb about halfway through. Copyshop by Romano. We'll use the DRM1 twice. Once for the beat, and again for some additional elements like claves, and the pitched percussion which plays a simple melody. I'll add some delay and reverb to that in post. Idioteque by Radiohead, again with some distortion. Assigning MIDI notes to the instruments is pretty simple. Hold the clap and drum 1 trigger buttons for about 2 seconds. You'll hear the sound of drum 1 as confirmation. The DRM1 is now in MIDI learn mode. Select the desired instrument and then send the MIDI note you want to assign to it. Repeat with as many instruments as you like. When you're done, hold the clap trigger button for a few seconds to exit MIDI learn mode. There's also a faster way of doing this for every instrument. Hold the clap and kick trigger buttons for about 2 seconds. Now play 8 notes one after another, and they will be mapped to the 8 instruments. Just be sure to keep those MIDI notes unoccupied that are 2 semitones below hi-hat 1 and hi-hat 2, because that's where you'll find the closed hi-hat sounds. By default, the hi-hat trig button triggers the open sound. But when you hold it for 2 seconds, this toggles it between the open and closed sound. Our cheat sheet for the DRM1 is super short compared to what we usually make, but you know, for the sake of completeness, we thought we'd still make one. And it's actually pretty useful. You can find it for free on our Patreon. The knobs run very smoothly, and I can easily go from one extreme to the other in one motion. But as you can imagine, it still takes quite a while to bring all of these 72 knobs into specific configuration. None whatsoever. Sending MIDI via USB and DIN MIDI cable was super stable. Although I do wonder how fast you can send MIDI notes before anything. That just works. How anticlimactic. Oh well. Very minimal. This MIDI-only version of the DRM1 Mark IV without trigger inputs is available for about 700 euros. The other version with trigger inputs costs about 800 euros. Compared to the predecessor Mark III, a few things have changed. Some modernizations like the universal power supply, a switch-on delay so you don't hear any annoying pops when turning the machine on or off, MIDI via USB, dynamic trigger inputs, and the trigger-to-MIDI conversion. The rest is mostly fine-tuning of the circuits, including a better signal-to-noise ratio. If you're like me and you love these sounds and tinkering with all the parameters, and you don't mind that it all takes a little more time, then this could be the right instrument for you. I just wish it had a second snare channel. There are so many other useful sounds in there, but of course most of the time it will already be occupied by a snare. This little sound laboratory is probably what would keep me from getting a modular system. The only real downside is that you need an external sequencer. Small changes can make a huge difference, and some parameters interact with each other. This means that recreating specific patches can be damn near impossible. But that's not what this machine is about. In the beginning, all the parameters can feel a bit overwhelming, but after a while, everything will start to make sense. That's it for this review. We decided to keep the channel ad-free, so if you like what we do, please support us on Patreon. Is there anything you'd like to know about the DRM1 in detail? Let us know in the comments.